please start. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon and good morning to those on the West Coast. My name is Asma Faizi, and I'm the president of the Afghan women's organization, Refugee and Immigrant Services. On behalf of my sisters at the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar. I will begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. August 15, 2022 marked a year since the Taliban took over Afghanistan. It was a day that forever changed the lives of millions of Afghans, especially women and girls. Millions of Afghans are in need of humanitarian aid due to the unprecedented economic, financial, and humanitarian crisis, which has severely limited their ability to exercise their human rights. Women and girls have faced severe restrictions that have resulted in their exclusion from most aspects of public and everyday life. We are extremely fortunate to have an expert panel that will discuss how things unfolded last summer, the current economic, political, and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, the Taliban's policies and practices regarding women's rights in light of Islamic principles, and the resettlement of Afghans who have made it to Canada, and the plight of those who were left behind. Before I turn it over to our esteemed moderator, I would like to take a moment to thank the members of the Special Parliamentary Committee on Afghanistan for their thoughtful consideration of the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and for their report honoring Canada's legacy in Afghanistan, responding to the humanitarian crisis and helping people reach safety, released last month in June. Members of this special committee heard from a wide range of stakeholders and made sound recommendations. These recommendations are all highly commended, and it is imperative that they are immediately implemented. As an Afghan Canadian lawyer, one of my greatest concerns is the negative effects sanctions regimes and anti-terrorism measures are having on Afghans who most need humanitarian protection and assistance, and that instead of alleviating human suffering, they cause more suffering. As a result of Canadian laws, charities and aid organizations are unable to provide direct life-saving assistance to Afghans. Just this month, World Vision was forced to cancel a shipment of therapeutic food, which could have fed around 1,800 people due to the sanctions on the Taliban. As Afghanistan is on the brink of collapse with millions of lives at stake, we urge the Canadian government to create workarounds or exemptions to allow aid to reach Afghanistan at this crucial time. As the only major donor that has yet to implement changes to its laws regarding humanitarian aid, Canada is preventing vital, direct humanitarian services from being provided to vulnerable Afghans. According to Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, achieving meaningful social change requires taking certain risks, which is why more responsive and accountable international assistance requires more efficient and effective funding mechanisms and approaches as well. Before I introduce our moderator, please note that we will have a Q&A session at the end, and given the large number of participants, we please ask you to put your questions and comments in the chat. We will be monitoring it and try to answer as many of those questions as we can. Let me now introduce our moderator. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce a longtime friend and supporter of Afghan women, Sally Armstrong. Human rights activist, journalist, and award-winning author Sally Armstrong has covered stories about women and girls in conflict zones all around the world, including Afghanistan. She has received numerous awards, including the Amnesty International Canada Media Award in 2000, 2002, 2011, and again in 2017. In 2019, she was named the Massey Lecturer. The lectures and book are titled Power Shift, The Longest Revolution. She is also the recipient of 11 honorary doctorate degrees and is an officer of the Order of Canada. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you, Asma. As usual, it's such a pleasure to be with you and your colleagues, and of course, the people who have tuned in all across Canada. This is a very important time for all of us regarding history and tomorrow. You know, I think it's fair to say, excuse me, that the events of August 15th were seen by the world as shocking, as well as heartbreaking. This 20-year exercise in nation building had fallen onto perilous ground. The Taliban were back, strutting around the presidential palace. And since then, we have been preoccupied with the questions that Asma has described, that we will go over today. We want to know what the heck happened and what needs to happen next. We also want to know, how is it that the Taliban have used Islam in a pretty disgraceful style? What are the other Muslim scholars saying about this? And for those who were lucky enough to get to Canada, we need to consider their needs, and we sure need to consider the needs of those who didn't get here. You know, it leads us to an abiding thought. What role do each of us play in all of this? And what can we do to help? Many have classified the 20 years the whole world was there helping as a failure. But I can tell you that in those 20 years, life expectancy in Afghanistan went from 47 years to 63 years, according to the World Health Organization. At the same time, maternal mortality dropped by 50%. The boys and the girls went back to school. This is not a failure. This is a miracle. But it also has to be said that beneath the winds of change, there was an accumulation of problems that was beginning to build up like a tsunami. And when it hit, we all know the women and girls paid the biggest price for that catastrophe. Now is the time to go to the barricades. We've been there before, so we know the way. And once there, once we get up and climb above the noise, maybe we can make ourselves heard. Because I believe that what happened in Afghanistan was not only an assault on innocent people. I'm afraid to say that this was the beginning of the end of world order as we know it. Consider the whole world stood by on August the 15th and watched while a murderous, punishing collection of thugs destroyed a fledgling democracy. How can that be? You know, pundits refer to the Taliban creed as a rigid interpretation of Islamic law. That's not Islamic law. What the Taliban did then and again now is they hijacked their own religion for political opportunism. There is not a word in the Quran to support what the Taliban did before and is doing now. Imagine whipping girls and women and saying they're working in the name of God. The only difference, excuse me again, the only difference today is they've been joined by discontented jihadis from all over the world who couldn't give a fig about Geneva Conventions or human rights, or indeed military codes of conduct, or all of the documents that Afghanistan has already signed with the UN, documents that protect people. You know, as I consider these terrible issues going on in the world today, I'm aware that some pundits said that COVID-19 was like an X-ray that showed everything in society that is broken. Well, the same can be said for the intervention in Afghanistan, like Somalia, like Ethiopia, Iraq, even Sarajevo. The massive expenditure of blood and treasure has exposed fissures that the international community has been unable to repair. Terrorists rarely lose. They have a way of melting into society when their backs are to the wall. ISIS, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and others, they make headlines and then they slither back into their lairs and surface again and again and again, usually with women and girls as their target. You know, NATO couldn't defeat the Taliban terrorists in Afghanistan, nor could droves of aid workers or even investors, and nor could the long-suffering people in Afghanistan themselves. Afghanistan was defeated partly by a lack of unity among Afghans driven by self-serving tribalism, but also by warlords and insurgents and political opportunists, as well as a bizarre truth that we in the international community invariably fail to find a path to peace, even when the X-rays show us the fractures. The days of international convention may very well be over. Now is the time for think tanks to start up, working with the UN and with NATO and with women like these three women that'll speak to you on our panel today, because it's time to examine the past and rewrite the intervention formula. The Taliban style of government is not sustainable. This is a classic good versus evil story, and evil must not win. The voices of good, both here and there, must abide. Let us begin with Shinkai Karokhail. She was a member of parliament in Afghanistan. In fact, she was the Afghan ambassador to Canada, and she can help us understand what happened and what impact the Taliban return has had on women and girls. Shinkai, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. It's a great honor to be introduced by such a strong woman. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Salamuna. Thank you, the organizer, for today's event and still thinking about Afghanistan and Afghan women. This August 2022 marks a year since the collapse of Afghanistan, a year since Afghan girls were banned from secondary school, a year since the end of freedom of speech and press inside Afghanistan, a year since the end of women's political participation in Afghanistan, a year since the end of democracy in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is suffering a severe humanitarian and economic crisis. Due to this, women and girls, as well as religious and ethnic minorities, have lost their rights and are in danger. It is not always like this. Prior to the Taliban invasion of Afghanistan in August 2021, Afghan women had been working towards achieving gender equality for the last 20 years since the collapse of the previous Taliban regime. While we had a long way to go, we had seen many positive changes. Millions of girls could go to school, and more than thousands of women could seek higher education. Women could run for a variety of positions, including political office, become judge, join the military, participate in free media, and become CEOs. The Afghan Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry had created a database of women-owned business in the country and conduct a survey in 2020. The survey findings showed that 26% of the 2,471 formal licensed business owned and run by women were registered between the year 2017 till 2020. About half of these licensed business were in non-traditional sector for women, such as information technology, media logistics, construction, manufacturing, processing and packaging, dry fruit and spices, jewelry exporting, fitness and fashion service, private schools, private daycare service, and many more. The survey also showed that there were over 54,000 informal business owned and run by women throughout the country. Altogether, these businesses have created over 130,000 jobs, plus employing themselves and helping other over 100,000 artisans in the rural area and sell their work in the cities. By 2021, of 900,000 civil servants, Afghan women accounted for about 27%, which totals to around 240,000 women have lost their job. 10% leadership, 16% of senior management position, and 27% of women were member of parliament. However, these improvements have affected women unequally, with women in urban area benefiting from more than women in rural areas. The 2004 Constitution guaranteed Afghan women's rights. The socioeconomic growth in Afghan economic growth in this area also significantly improved the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. Women have become a crucial part of the economy, and their removal from the private and public sector has caused our economy to free fall. The 2020, the US Taliban agreement did not address the protection of women's rights, even though the US government claimed those rights as one of the reasons for their 2001 intervention in Afghanistan. The closed-door deal and the US withdrawal from Afghanistan resulted in the worst humanitarian crisis in the history of Afghanistan. Despite their initial promises of guaranteeing and respecting women's rights within the framework of Islam and forming an inclusive government, the Taliban have reverted to their harsh rules. The Taliban have severely restricted the rights and freedom of women and girls across all spheres of lives. As of today, 3.5 million girls are being banned the right to attend secondary school. Not only are these girls banned, they are being harassed on the way to school, and universities stop at the checkpoints. In addition to the tragic situation for Afghan women's rights, Afghanistan is facing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now, with millions of Afghans facing starvation. Afghan people are forced to make desperate decisions due to dire poverty. For some, this entails selling a kidney or selling their daughters into marriage, a fate that thousands of young girls face according to FAO and WFP. 19.5 million population do not have enough food to eat. 3.2 million children suffering from malnutrition. Almost 4 million Afghans are internally displaced, 80% of whom are women and children. 23 million people are in desperate needs of food. At least 1 million children at risk of dying due to severe acute malnutrition. And the UN has said that Afghanistan is heading towards universal poverty. And within a year, the poverty rate will be over 97%. We are also being struck by natural disasters, with 1,000 lives being claimed by a devastating earthquake in June this year, and the flash flood killing 97 Afghans in the last 10 days. The international community need to come together to establish a unified stand against the violation of basic human rights, particularly against women who experience the absolute worst aspect of violation under the Taliban regime, as well as provide the necessary aid. I therefore present the following suggestion. The world can help Afghan by helping the Afghan economy, by helping revive the Afghan economy, by partnering with Afghan inside the country so that they can bring about sustainable change through non-violent means, injecting cash into the economy. Furthermore, continue to deliver humanitarian aid with smart operating costs. Finally, the presence of women must be streamlined in the private and public sector. The country cannot move forward if half of its population is being restricted and deprived of education and basic human rights. Women participation must be guaranteed. The international community must demand Afghan women's participation in the Afghan government during their talk with Taliban. Additionally, Afghan women and women-led civil society organization must be able to work and move freely and safely throughout the country. Ensure women equal access to humanitarian assistance. If assistance strategies are not crafted with the challenges of women's lives in mind, it is certain that assistance will be delivered to men who will control not only the assistance, but also critical aspect of women's life. Aid organizations need to meet regularly with women leaders, both inside and outside Afghanistan, to include their perspective in the aid distribution plans. I implore the international community to please help our country before the crisis gets any worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Shinkai. And now let's Jafri, the Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. And she is going to outline for us the distorted views that the Taliban have been using when they refer to Islam. Nuzhat?
Thank you, Sally. And thank you so much, Shinkai Jan, for your remarks, and Sally and Asma for starting us off on this very, very important discussion. I'm not a religious scholar. I'm a Muslim woman who has faith, who is a believing Muslim woman. And I have been reflecting a lot on our traditions, our teachings, what we have learned from childhood about our faith, and what has enabled me and millions of other women and girls around the world who are Muslim, who are achieving great things. And they were doing so in Afghanistan until the Taliban took over. So I'm going to start with a verse from the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربكم أكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم إنسان ولم يعلم. So in translation, it says, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, read in the name of your Lord, who created the human being from a clot of congealed blood. Read in the name of your Lord, who taught by the pen. He taught the human being what he did not know. So I chose this verse because it begins with commanding the Prophet. This was the first revelation that the Prophet Muhammad received from God in the Quran. And it starts with the word read. And then God repeats it. Read in the name of your Lord who created you from a single clot of congealed blood. And then he repeats, read in the name of your Lord who taught by the pen. So you have the reading and the writing. You have the pen capturing what is to be taught, what is to be learned, and reading, which enables you to actually acquire knowledge. So I decided that I would start with that because it is so it is so pervasive. The idea of seeking knowledge, of being empowered to learn about things yourself. Over time, women and girls have acquired knowledge. That was the case in Afghanistan. Before the 40-year um, period that Afghanistan has experienced war in, and even, off and on, there were moments when women were playing very important roles um, in that society, as women and girls have been throughout the Muslim world. The most important thing to sort of think about is how is it possible that half the Muslim population would be disempowered and not participate in the success and the well-being of all communities around the world. The Quran is very clear about the treatment of women and girls. And every time God addresses men, he also addresses women. So in chapter 4, verse 124, in the Quran, it says, if any do deeds of righteousness, be they male or female, and have faith, they will enter heaven, and not the least of injustice will be done to them. And the most important factor in judging human beings are their deeds, whether they be male or female. Another important verse says, the believers, men and women, are allies to one another. They enjoin the common good and forbid the bad. They observe prayers and give charity and obey God and his prophet. And repeatedly, the Quran addresses men and women. Everything about how they should behave, whether it's dressing modestly or being modest, being humble, being charitable. And it's interesting that there is no distinction made about seeking knowledge either, or justice. In fact, our faith is a justice-based faith. And there is absolutely no room in our faith for inequality and injustice. So what has happened under the Taliban regime, where the Taliban, the former Taliban and the new ones, who are exactly the same as they previously were, is that they have completely and totally distorted our faith. They have hijacked it, as Sally said, and come up with a version. I will not call it Islam, because it doesn't meet any of the tenets of our faith. The equality of men and women is repeated time and again. The idea of gaining knowledge and learning, I think there's something like 800 different occurrences of the word ilm, or knowledge, in the Quran. So if God had wanted to prevent women and girls from learning, he would not have addressed every aspect of life to both women and men. Another really important thing to recall is that over centuries, women have contributed to civilization. In fact, the very first library in the world was established by a woman in Morocco, Muslim woman in Morocco. The Prophet's own wife, Khadija, his first wife, in fact, was a businesswoman. And when he met her, so she's the one, I believe, who proposed to him. She was a businesswoman, and she was looking for great talent to advance her business interests. So she enlisted the help of the Prophet. She actually hired him to help in the trade because it was, he could travel and she could manage the business. She is our inspiration. She was a businesswoman who had the wits and the wherewithal to conduct her business, but also hire a very, very talented human being, the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad. And she became a Muslim. She was the first Muslim woman to embrace Islam. And she's a key figure in our history. Demonstrate that women should not be relegated to the background, or should be prohibited from practicing professions, from learning, from educating themselves and educating others. So she's a great example. And throughout history, there have been many examples like that of women that have been prominent. And in fact, women have been prominent in the society in Afghanistan as well. And there are many, many examples of that. So this distorted, I would say, inhumane view of how Muslim women should behave, whether they should practice any professions, whether they should be educated, that the Taliban have advocated, they have nothing to do with Islam. And I think if we want to be able to counter what they're doing, we have to keep on repeating and educating people about what Islam says about equality between women and men. And the number of times that the Quran addresses humankind, or I won't use the word mankind very purposely. I use human beings or humankind, because there is no distinction when God addresses people in that way between men and women. He's addressing everyone. So if the Taliban were to address, not address half of that humankind or that humanity, they are at a great disadvantage, because all of us together, men, women, children, can make a better world. And like I was reading from that verse about enjoining good, where God says the believers, men and women, are allies of one another. They enjoin the common good and forbid the bad. They observe prayers and give charity and obey God and his prophet. So that is our injunction. That is where we begin to work together. And you know what? The Taliban be damned. Thank you.
Oh, Nuzhat, leave it to you. That was terrific. Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to Adeena Niazi. Adeena is the founder and the executive director of the Afghan Women's Organization. I have to tell you, she's the first person I met in 1996 when I began to follow this file. And I'm terribly grateful to her for all she has done for me. Adeena is going to help us to know how we can help those who have been resettled in Canada and what should be done about those who did not get away. Adeena.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be in presence of the most distinguished women who are human rights and also women's rights advocates. Thank you, Sally, for moderating this session and for siding with the Afghan people and Afghan women for over decades, in particular at this unfortunate time of our history. Sally has been always with us, and I call Sally actually when she was struggling for us, Sally strong arm. Sally is actually Sally because I felt she was a strong arm beside Afghans. So that's what I titled her. Okay, I will cover the Canadian government's response to the Afghan crisis, and I will highlight the barriers that continue to exist for vulnerable Afghans to reach in safety. My presentation is based on my deep connection with the Afghan communities in Canada, Afghanistan, and elsewhere in the world, and also my experience with the Afghan Women Organization and my work with the refugees. Afghan Women Organization, Refugee and Immigrant Services was founded by refugee women, as Sally mentioned, and also has been led by refugee women for over 30 years. And it is a settlement organization, and also it is a sponsorship agreement holder, or SO. It has been advocating for the human rights of refugees and also for Afghan women and girls' rights. We have led numerous income-generating and educational projects in refugee camps in Pakistan and inside Afghanistan for Afghan women, including several home-based underground schools for girls when the Taliban were in power in 1990s. Currently, we are having all-girls orphanage in Afghanistan. In addition to what Sally and Shinkai has already said, I want to also add that the current crisis in Afghanistan is significantly worse than what we are seeing in media. It constantly jeopardizes the people's lives, including the severe starvation for women. We commend the governments of Canada's commitment to bring 40,000 Afghans to Canada. But the government has established this program for resettling Afghans in two parts. Actually, that's a three parts, but two main parts, which is special immigration measures, or SIM, and the special humanitarian program for Afghans. There's a small program also to bring the formal interpreters, extended family members. The SIM program is for the Afghan nationals who have assisted government of Canada in Afghanistan. And the second program, which is the special humanitarian program, it is for vulnerable Afghan nationals in need of resettlement. This humanitarian program has two parts. One is GAR, or government-sponsored refugees, government-assisted refugees, and also PSR, privately sponsored refugees. In order to qualify for these programs, the refugee must fall under 5 categories that the government has established for the program. So I want to point out that there are many at-risk Afghans that may not meet these criteria. For example, the women who face gender-based persecution, those who work at high level in the previous government, and many more. And there is also additional barriers to qualify under this humanitarian program. For example, under the government-sponsored, government-assisted program, the refugee must be referred by one of the referring partners. And the main referring partner is UNHCR to the government of Canada. But when Afghans have no or extremely limited access to the UNHCR, in some of the countries, the UNHCR registration for refugees do not exist at all. For example, in Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan also is very limited. The other barrier is the crossing the border. It's very risky for Afghans, especially when the borders are closed. But refugee, even if refugee makes it to the neighboring countries, their risk of persecution, the risk of persecution, intimidation, and deportation, and also arrest continues with them. A document requirement is another significant barrier for Afghans. It's almost impossible for the woman to go to the Taliban office and ask for the documentation. There are also challenges with the PSR program, but I don't want to go through them because of the time constraints. And the Afghan who made it to Canada, they come from a variety of educational, social, professional, political, and cultural backgrounds. We need to remember that these refugees have left their homeland in a chaotic manner, and they are living they have left their family members and also their loved ones behind. So this has obviously traumatized them. And refugee women are exposed to additional trauma because they must take care of their other family members. They experience additional challenges when they resettle to Canada and to a new country. These challenges include, but it's not limited to the lack of affordable housing, unemployment, adjusting to the new environment, and more. I want to end by saying that while we appreciate and understand the diverse individual and collective needs of Afghans as one of the most vulnerable refugee communities in the world, it is also important to recognize their ambitions, talent, and skills that would contribute to the much broader scope in the society, in the Canada, and also in the economy of the country. When provided with the little even more support or opportunity, the Afghans have excellent potential to succeed. We have the examples of Afghans who have made successful businesses, and they have proven to be excellent teachers, lawyers, doctors, and so on. So I know many generous Canadian people and also the Canadian organizations have provided support to the newly arrived Afghans. I would encourage you also to continue supporting the Afghans and so they can successfully resettle in Canada. And also you can support the Afghans who are left behind by calling to the local MP and to encourage them to continue providing humanitarian aid to Afghans and to remove the barriers that I have mentioned, so the Afghans who are at risk could make safe travel to Canada and to other countries. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Adeena. Now, we do have time for questions, but I want to ask a question, one to each of our wonderful panelists, and then we'll turn it over to the chat room. So, panelists, please keep your answer tight so we have lots of time to turn to the chat room. Shinkai, I want to start with you. All of us, as you pointed out, want something to happen over there, and you made a list of what needs to happen, which was brilliant. How can we do that? We're not there, and it doesn't seem we're going to go there. Do you have any advice for how we can make things happen when we don't have an embassy, we don't have a military over there? What can we do, Shinkai?
Sally, still many countries, including America or European country, they are working with the Taliban through their embassies, through their political representative in Doha, in Qatar, and even like through European Union representative in Kabul. So there is many ways to talk with the Taliban, to deal with it. And also Taliban really need like the aid or the money or the development should go back to Afghanistan. So this is the time that the international community use such a situation and set their own condition and ask the Taliban to let them to work with a local partner, with the NGOs, with non-governmental organization. As I said, that the money way to work, because there's, as we met them with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, and we requested, well, the Canada could help, like the way Germany wants to like support girls' education or education sector in Afghanistan. Even before that, many ministries, they were implementing their programs through non-governmental, partnering with non-governmental organizations. So this is the time to call for a proposal and ask the non-governmental organization to apply for those programs based on their background, based on their expertise, and work with it, especially supporting secondary education in Afghanistan. As I said, like I said, there are many women who are teaching around 40,000 teachers we had. So most of them now, they are not working anymore because there is no any job for them. Or like the Ministry of Finance announced that, well, the female employee should not come, and they should send their male member to work instead of them. And
okay, I'm
so
going to
like
hold you up
working
there.
with a non-governmental organization for development work and also aid work, it is very much easier to how to support Afghans.
Well, I know, for example, Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, who've been there from the beginning, they've switched all their schooling to online schooling, so they are keeping it up. But it seems to me that at some point, someone has to go over there and sit down with the Taliban and say, look, we got to work out a deal. Do you think that can happen?
Working with the Taliban or talking to the Taliban doesn't mean that you're officially recognizing their government. It's two different things,
right.
You know, according to the law, you know. So that through their political office in Doha, this is the way that different countries could say, well, for example, Canada is interesting to work with different non-governmental organizations for implementing so and so a project inside Afghanistan. So this is the way you can inject money back to the economy of Afghanistan and also girls. I would not prefer like the online school because every girl doesn't have access to internet and cannot afford to have internet and access to those education. We have to reach every girl and provide the support.
And that's true, but I know also Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan are trying to make sure every girl does have. So it's one of the ways. Anyway, there's so much more to talk about. Nuzhat, I want to ask a question to you. Nuzhat, do you think that it's time that Muslim scholars around the world addressed what the Taliban is doing? What do you feel about that?
Of course they should, because it's really important for everyone, Muslims and non-Muslims, to understand what Islam really does say about equality of men and women, and the importance of education and of acquiring knowledge and learning constantly, and the idea of making your own decisions and your choices based on the knowledge that you gain, and be able to contribute to society. Again, that's very much part of our faith.
So
So
how do we do that? How do
Uh,
we go up there and say to all these brilliant scholars around the world, it's time to speak up? Who's going to do that?
I guess it depends on who your audience is. If the audience is the Taliban, then I think we have to engage them, like Shinkai Jan said. We have to sit across from them, and because as I mentioned earlier, we have to engage both men and women in that endeavor, because they're supposed to work together for the common good, for the good of everybody in their society, not just one segment of that society. And what you need probably are a few male champions who can also sit with the female champions, of the cause, because you need that. You need those alliances, and it's really hard to know who the Taliban would actually listen to, because there isn't really a single governmental regime now, even in the Muslim world, that would give them a nod for what they're doing. Because
Well, I'm thinking that you people have so much knowledge and so much, well, I love the way you talk. My challenge to you is, why don't you make a list of the biggest, best known Muslim scholars in the world and petition them. Say, we, the women of the world, the Muslim women of the world, ask you to go and talk to the Taliban. What do you think?
Well, it's a brilliant idea. It means mobilizing women around the world. We can start with Canada. One of the really powerful things for CCMW, for the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, is the allies that we have that are not just Muslim, but we have lots and lots of non-Muslim allies as well, and we have empathetic men in our communities, who like what we do, who would be very willing to work with us. Some of them are here with us today. So let's not just mobilize the women, but find people with common ground who want to change that mindset.
What a great idea. What a great idea. You do it. We'll all help you, I'm sure. I'm going to move on now, because we're really losing time quickly. Adeena, just a quick question to you. There are a lot of people listening, and they're going to be sharing with their friends what they heard. What is the easiest answer we can give to people when they say, how can I get involved? Is there a number to call? Is there a website? Can you tell us what we should do? Oh, your sound is off.
Thank you. So thank you, Sally. So one of the most, as I mentioned, is to support Afghan women who are here. You can provide their support by making friends with them, mentor them, or also like provide the additional materials they need. And also the most important is the advocacy. Advocacy will be the two ways. Advocacy for bringing the Afghans here, for resettling Afghans, and also to help the Afghans who are the Afghan women who are left behind, because we are not bringing all Afghan women to Canada, those who are starving in Afghanistan for kids. So that could be done through getting to their MPs, writing to their MPs, and talk about a lot. And the other way is that if they could get this, involved in sponsoring Afghans. For example, the government of Canada has committed to bring the Afghan refugees, a number of Afghan refugees, and some of them are coming through privately sponsorship program. The private sponsorship program needs to have enough money and resources in place to bring many Afghans. So for that, they need sponsorship. They need people who come forward and just take over the expenses for the new for the Afghans to sponsor.
Can people call the Afghan Women's Organization or go on your website to get more information?
They can call surely, but there is also, as I mentioned, there are barriers because the government has given limited spaces or spots for sponsoring Afghans for sponsorship and all, and there are only a certain number of Afghans who fall under the criteria which is established by the government. And also there are quotas. We always don't have the spaces or the quotas. So we are getting limited quotas, and when we are running out of that, we have to go and apply. So we cannot plan in advance how many refugees we could bring in a year. That's why it is really disappointing to us and also to those who are calling us, because we cannot accommodate all the list. But there are other sponsorship holders and there are other ways. And one way that we need to get to the government and lobby is the sponsorship of group of five. The group of five is that five citizens of Canadian citizens of land or permanent residents can come together and sponsor a refugee. But there is a limitation on that because the refugee has to be recognized by the UNHCR or the state government as a refugee. If they don't have the certificate, they may not qualify under G5.
Okay,
that's why
let's make it easy. Let's make it easy. Can you call out either an email or a website or a phone number that our listeners and watchers can have?
Yeah, we have the information on our list, on our websites, and also we are.
What is your website?
Our website, I will put it in chat.
www.a.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I've
put it
used it enough.
on the chat. I put it on the chat for you.
Okay, put it up in the chat. Thank you. I had so many questions, and I'm just so anxious to talk some more, but we really have to give a chance to all those people who've tuned in. So someone is going to advise me of the questions in the chat room. Can I hear those?
Yes, we have a lot of comments in the chat. No questions yet. So everyone listening, if you have a question for any of the panelists or a general question, please put them in the chat now.
Okay, while we're waiting for those, I'd like to go back to all three of our panelists. It seems to me that after the former president of the US, Donald Trump, cut a deal with the Taliban, which no side kept to, as we know, it seems to me there's a bit of a push me, pull me feeling between Afghans and the international community. What advice do you have for both sides?
Sorry to interrupt, Sally. We have a couple hands up now.
Okay.
And also, yeah, and also we have a question asking if you'd be able to share your contact information, if that's okay with you in the chat. But first hand up is from Asma. Asma, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really grateful to be in presence of all these people that I admire for so many years, especially Adeena John and Sally. Thank you so much for this panel about the Afghan women. So I've been listening to the panelists and about the comments, but most of the solution for the problem of people or majorly women of Afghanistan seems to looking outside. We're looking from a solution from outside to come into the country. But we are forgetting one thing, that if we get the people that are in the country and we have, a culture of shura. So people, or we call it loya jirga. So we get the heads of all the communities, all the people that are supporters of women and supporters of freedom for the people of Afghanistan, get them to have a lawyer jirga in the country. And to me, I have always used this analogy of, if I have a fight with my husband, my sister is not going to be able to, because he said, she said situation comes up, right? She's not going to be able to solve my problem. So this has to come within my family.
Well, Asma, this is a great idea. And it's not a question, it's an idea. And it's a good one. But how do you have a lawyer jirga when the Taliban say you're not allowed to have a lawyer jirga?
So again, we have strong, respected ladies like Adeena that might know so many people within the community, regardless. This is Afghans that, whether they are in the United States or Germany or in Canada, get together and just develop somehow a connection with these Taliban to just somehow I know it's too many somehows, and it is difficult. It's a very big task, but it has to be done in a way that we all have to get involved.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
It's something all of us need to be thinking about. Now, I think there's another question from Mohammed. No.
Yes.
Thank you, Armstrong. So I just wanted to share something. I was trying, and I'm struggling to work with some well-known scholars to actually raise this with the Taliban from the Quranic and Islamic perspective, that why the women's are banned from going to school. It's completely incorrect. So I can help with that, and I really need a body, like an organization, to help me with that. I have already spoken to some scholars, and they're ready. They're ready to support us with like written kind of documents to gather and just speak up and connect with the Afghan Taliban currently. And internally also in Afghanistan, I did talk to some scholars, and they're ready to participate in this discussion.
This is also a good idea. So let's task you with that job. You can be in touch with Nuzhat and anyone else on this panel, but get going with it. And I don't think it's a matter of people quietly discussing this in a cafe. I think it's time for the highest scholars in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Pakistan, everywhere in the world where the Muslim faith has huge, huge numbers, to maybe get 3, 4, 5 of them to come together and absolutely condemn what the Taliban is doing. Okay, Mohammed, that's your job. Is there another question?
I can do that. That's what I really need.
Great.
I wanted to connect with you and others. I can share my email and phone number. So let's work on it. I'm ready to help and support.
Good. Is there another question? Or are we out of time? Because Nina, I think you need a couple of minutes for closing.
Yeah, just a couple minutes.
All right. Is there another question?
No questions in the chat so far.
All right. So Nina, over to you.
Oh, we just got a hand up. Do you want to put your question in the chat? Thank you.
I'll wait for you to read it out, Nina.
Sorry. It might take me a bit longer to write it. Can I ask it?
Just say it out loud.
Just ask it, and make it a question, not a statement.
What can we? Qatar was a mediator of this whole process, and right now they witnessed they're Muslim dominant, and they witnessed the year go by with the Taliban decision. What kind of consequences can Qatar apply? What kind of statements can Qatar make to properly establish ramifications for the Taliban's actions for this last year?
Who is your question to?
I guess whomever could answer it. If we can get some kind of navigation on that matter.
Shinkai, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yes, two countries which they were deeply involved in all this negotiation of supporting Taliban. One is Qatar, because Qatar want to make whatever is like a strategic political status for themselves as a Muslim country in the Muslim world, and also Pakistan for their own interests, how they sheltered and how they support Taliban, and still they are too much involved and intervention and daily activity of Taliban government in Afghanistan, especially the establishment, the intelligence, and the military of Pakistan. I cannot blame the people of Pakistan. They're wonderful. They're great people. But what is Pakistan military doing are not the right things. The world should not ignore and forget what Pakistan played the role and how they made to fill everyone, including the international community, to stabilize Afghanistan and to also to Afghanistan to sustain its democracy and live free of conflict. So Qatar is not only as a Muslim country, but also as a representative of U.S. government in that area, can really pressurize and can really work with the Taliban. Taliban families are still living in Qatar. Qatari government financially supporting. Qatar government is chartering the plane for their luxury trip. Their family studying there. Their children are studying there. Should be questioned, and also as for the support, they should really talk to Taliban leadership. They cannot get everything, but they can deprive the poor people of Afghanistan, the 37, 38 million Afghans. And also, Pakistan government, I'm sure, will not help, but how we can stop Pakistan military for further intervention and supporting by sending their madrasa, head of their madrasa, how to establish their madrasas inside Afghanistan instead of helping our education sector, but they want to shift the madrasa, political madrasa, which they made it, how to continue to have a jihad in Afghanistan or India should be stopped that. But because we need a two strategy, how to work with the Qatari, to how conditionally work with the Taliban, and also how we can stop Pakistan military and intelligence for further intervention and the support or the wrong advice they are giving to the Taliban government. Banning girls from school is absolutely, it's not in Islam, but absolutely it's a political decision, as the ex-president Karzai gave us such a statement. They know it's not banned in Islam, but actually Islam starts with a great word of read, Iqra. So that's Iqra is for male and female. It's not only for male. So what we are suffering, how to keep this country very destabilized, backward, and how to control it. This is the easiest way to use the name of Sharia and Islam. How to exclude, how to ban, and how to eliminate half of its population, which are female, girls and women of Afghanistan. So Pakistan military and intelligence had a very negative role, and what we are suffering just because of the strategic depth in Afghanistan. But the Qatari just want to make a good name and fame out of this deal, which they made it for Taliban, should work and ask the Taliban to change their policies regarding women's inclusion, girls' education, women's economic activity, social activity, even and political. So I think Qatari could play a very good role.
Thank you.
I would just want to respond by saying, this conversation is much greater than an hour. If there were more ways of having these conversations with you ladies, and I'm sorry that Afghanistan has got this destabilized. I wish that this wasn't part of our Muslim reputation and current legacy right now. And together the process will be healed and reconciled. So please please keep up the effort. All of your attempts are valuable, and I'm so sorry that this is the case right now. This is not what Afghanistan or Muslims or non-Muslims deserve at all. And thank you for taking this time.
Thank you very much for your input.
Any way we can move the conversation.
And I think what is happening is every person involved is calling for action. So it's time for action. And it's also time for Nina to close out this very interesting hour.
Thank you, Sally. On behalf of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, I want to convey my thanks to Asma Faizi, Adeena Niazi, the Afghan Women's Organization, to Sally Armstrong, and to Shinkai Karokhail, and the CCMW team, including Nuzhat Jafri, Iman Ahmed Noor, and Zainab Jamal, for bringing us together to learn about the events of August 15th, 2021, and the current situation in Afghanistan today. We're all witnesses to what's happening in Afghanistan, and God will ask us what we did when our sisters and their families were suffering. I pray that we'll all do our best within our means to make a positive difference in their lives. We are all one human community, and when one of us is hurting, we all hurt. Many Afghans, I pray that Afghans live in peace and break the shackles of tyranny and oppression. And we pray that Afghans will be able to regain their dignity and autonomy once again. We must remain hopeful and positive that life will improve for Afghans in Afghanistan and abroad. They're a strong people, and with our help and our government's assistance, they will have a brighter future, inshallah. Thank you again to all of you for joining this discussion today. Inshallah, it'll be one of many. We appreciate your input and ideas and your donations. If you could forward them to the AfghanWomen.org organization, we'd really appreciate it, and they will make sure it gets into the right hands. Assalamu alaikum, and peace and blessings to all of you. Thank you again.